Welcome back to another VBA tutorial. What are we doing? We are continuing a discussion that I kind of started a couple weeks ago. We were seeing how to make API requests using a VBA library. But in that particular example, we were using some built-in libraries. So we were getting our code. It was coming back to us in an XML format. And then we were parsing that XML format. And we were basically just dumping it right into our workbook. And that's great as long as your API offers XML versions. Some APIs out there do not offer an XML version of their code that comes back to you. And so in those situations, we're going to probably get JSON formatted code. Well, in that particular situation, there's not really a built-in library that will allow us to easily parse JSON. Now, technically, there's one. It's the Microsoft JavaScript library, but that one is unfortunately kind of prone to errors depending on the version of Windows that you're on. So if you're on an older version of Windows, or even an older version, not older, a newer version of Windows or a newer version of Office, that particular library actually won't work. And so even on my system, I tried using it, no luck, no success whatsoever. And so in order to actually parse JSON in what I would call an easy fashion, you have to go to some third-party resources. Now, luckily, this is such a common task that a lot of other people have made libraries to make this process very, very easy. And so in today's tutorial, I'm going to be demonstrating one of those third-party libraries that we can be using. Now, this particular one can be found on GitHub. So if you go to, and I'll make sure to put a link in the description below. It's VBA tools, and then it's VBA-JSON. Now, this particular library was written by a guy named Tim Hall, it looks like. And in this particular one, he basically wrote a VBA script that will parse JSON formatted strings for us. And it's a pretty long, I would say module of code. There's a lot going on here. I never actually really took the time to go in detail as to what's kind of going on, but I have tested it on a couple different APIs and I didn't have any real issues with it, so it seems to be pretty reliable. Now, the nice thing is he's constantly looking like it's updating it. So he has updated it before, and so it sounds like as maybe errors come up or something like that, they're kind of going out there and making changes. Now, I think at this point, it's relatively a pretty reliable library, so I don't think the updates are going to be happening that much. But basically what he does is he shows you how to use this particular library. And then say, hey, well, if you want to parse a JSON string like this is kind of how you would access it, and certain indexes and things along that nature. And then he kind of goes on to say, hey, you can also convert to JSON. You can also take a convert to JSON and then JSON basically parse it again. And then he's also showing how to read files that contain JSON formatted strings. And then he also shows how to access things like nested list inside of a JSON object. And so this is going to become really helpful when we have to access what I would call complicated JSON. So a JSON string that might have a list in it or another dictionary in it, or so on and so on and so on. So once you kind of get a good feel for how this library works, what you can do is you could go down to download the latest release. That will take you to a new page, and from here you basically just want to download the latest version that he has. Now, I just do the zip one. I think that also works for Mac as well, and I believe that's what the second zip file is for, but I'm on Windows, so I just chose the zip file one. And once you do that, you basically go inside your workbook, so like this one, and you would go to your Visual Basic developer. And then from here, you would just import your file. So you go File, Import File, and I have mine in my Downloads folder. Well, actually, no, it's in my OneDrive. And you can just go inside of it, and you're going to basically just import this .bas file. And once you do, you will see it here. Now, there might be some code that's highlighted red. You can just delete that code. That's more if you have like a 32-bit Mac or 32-bit Windows system. In those situations, you don't need those lines of code. And so I just delete them. It makes things a little bit easier. But other than that, you can kind of, if you're interested, you can see how the code's actually working. But like I said, it is a little bit long. So, you're going to have to dedicate some time to understand kind of what's going on and really how it's working. But once you've done that, Let's just kind of see how we would work with it. Well, the first thing that we have to do is we have to import our JSON object. So, well, sorry, not import. We're basically declaring an object variable. We're not giving it a type. We're just calling it JSON. And that's because they're going to be referencing it as our JSON converter. And then you also have to declare a dictionary object if you have something where we have nested dictionaries. Now, by default, dictionaries might not be enabled. So what you have to do is you go up to Tools, References, and you want to make sure that you have the Microsoft Scripting Runtime Library enabled. That is how you access a dictionary object inside of VBA. And once you do that, there's kind of two different ways. Well, I mean, it's not really two different ways. In this example, I'm showing you two different types of strings that we can parse. Now, in this particular one, it's a pretty standard JSON string. So it's basically like a dictionary in Python. We have our key, we have our value, we have our key, we have our value, our key, and our value. Now, what this one's showing you is like, okay, you have, just a simple, number, you have a list, you have another number, but this one's nested in a dictionary. And so to basically access a particular value that's associated with a key, what you do is you first set your JSON object equal to your JSON converter. You call the parse JSON method, and then you pass through your JSON string. And from there, it will parse it for you. You have a new object that's been returned back to you. And now you can access the individual elements by simply passing through the key. So in this example, my first key is A, and if I run this one, it would return 123. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to clear out my content. That was from some code I wrote earlier. That's for a simple JSON structure. You might have a little bit more of a complicated one. So for example, you might have a JSON string which has a list of dictionaries, for example. So here, what I do is I have a values key that has a list of dictionaries. In this example, what I would do is, again, just parse that JSON string. But in this example, I can loop through each element inside my list, but each element is really its own dictionary. Hence, that's why I declare my dictionary object up here. So I'm saying for each dictionary in my list of dictionaries, then access the A key inside of each dictionary. Now you gotta be a little bit careful here. First, there might be a time where every dictionary might not have the same key. So in those types of situations, you might have to build in some more logic into your code so that way you can handle that situation. So you might want to check if a particular key exists before you actually go and try to access the value. Now, if I run this, let's see what we get. So we can see that the first one returned 123. Well, that's right because that belongs to our A key. The second one looped through each element inside of our values list and got the A key the value that belongs to the A key, which in this case is 1 for each one. So they're just duplicates. So that's how we use this JSON converter. Again, I'll be putting down a link below, and I probably will have a copy just on my GitHub just to be safe. But honestly, if you're going to download it, just download it from the source because he's probably going to have an updated version over time. I'm kind of keeping mine just as a backup. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's go to our actual code. Now, I am assuming that you have watched a previous video that is related to my XML version because I am not going to go into too much detail about how this code works. I'm assuming that you've seen how it works before. Now, for the most part, everything's relatively the same for our request. So all we're going to do is we declare our variable, which is just a XML HTTP request. And then we have our new request object. So we just set our XML object, the one that we declared up here, equal to our new instance of that request object. And then all I'm doing here is I'm defining the components of my request. Now we're going to be using the Google Maps APIs, and we're going to do the places search. So in this one, I define my base URL. That's just the endpoint. Well, sorry, it's not the endpoint, it's the base URL. And then we have our endpoint, which is a nearby search, and I'm requesting that my data be sent back in a JSON format. And then I define each parameter. well, depending on the API that you're using, it's going to have very different parameters. So in this case, the Google Maps API has a location parameter, which I then set to a geo coordinate. It also has a radius parameter that I set to 1500 as a string. And then it has a type, which is basically like a category. So a category of places. And in this case, I chose to do restaurants. It also requires your API key. My API key is in this workbook, but it's on a specific sheet that you guys can see. Again, API keys should be private. I do want to make sure that I convert that to a string, though, just to be safe, because sometimes Excel does some formatting stuff. It might take an API key, make it a number or something that's not text. You want to just make sure that you always have text, and so I make sure to call the convert string function. And then really all I'm doing here is I'm just building my quote-unquote URL. From here, I then call my XML object, my request object. I call the open method. I define what type of method we're going to be doing. In this case, we're doing a GET request, so we're getting some data. And then I define my URL that I want to request. And that's just the API URL that I built right up here. I send my request, and then I pass through my status code. And so that just tells me, hey, everything worked great. And so just before I get started, which one's not defined? Oh, it's because I have option explicit on. Oopsie. No. Perfect. So I do get a 200 request code back. Oh, sorry, status code back. So that means the request was successful. So we can move on to the next step. Alrighty. So from here, we need to define a few object variables. The first one is going to be JSON. And then the second one is going to be JSON photo. This is for showing the, I would call it, more complicated parsing. And these are both going to just be a generic object. There's nothing kind of built into VBA, so we just have to declare them as a generic object. Okay, so from here, we're going to declare a couple more. We're going to say result. This is going to be our result dictionary. And then a photo. And then each one of these is going to be a dictionary object. So a dictionary object has keys and values associated with it. Okay, so from here, we need to parse the response. So parse the response. And we're going to set that JSON object variable equal to our JSON converter. And we're going to call the parse JSON method. Notice we do have IntelliSense, so this is kind of nice. We're not kind of going in blind. We do have access to IntelliSense. I'm going to call my XML object, and then I'm going to call the response text property. This will return all the response text from that request, and it's going to pass it through into the JSON converter. Okay, so the first section that we're going to handle is the results. So the results come back in this shape and form. So the result is simply a list of dictionaries, being just basically a dictionary of different places with an ID, a price level, rating, so on and so on. Now, depending on what you're requesting, you might have a couple different options here in the sense of you might not want the photos coming back. You might just want the place ID or the price level. So Google Maps makes it really flexible. A lot of APIs sometimes will make it very flexible for you to kind of customize the information that you want sent back. I'm just doing the general one. I'm assuming we don't really care at this point. So first, handle the results section of our response. So what does that look like? So we're going to say for each value, for each result in JSON results, and we do want to make sure that we pass through it as a string. So it's the key for our particular dictionary. We're going to loop through each result in the results list. And then what are we going to do? Well, let's grab a couple things. So we'll grab the ID. So we'll say debug.print value and then ID. And then let's grab the latitude. Grab the latitude. And so here we're going to do debug print value. Or sorry, not value. Why am I doing value? It's Where's result? My apologies. Result, and it's going to be geometry. Here I am trying to spell again. And this one's nested. So if I want to do a nested access, it's going to be outer than inner. And you might be saying, well, Alex, how did you know that? How did you know to go like that? I find my key, I go to the next key, and I go to the next key. Keep in mind, each one of these is a dictionary. That's why I'm allowed to do that. So it's very different if it's a list. So we can grab the latitude, and then we can also grab the longitude. So let's longitude, and then this one is at LNG. Okay, perfect. So let's see what we get when we get this. I'm going to clear that out. Perfect. As you can see, it parsed it relatively nicely. So we got each ID, we got the latitude and the longitude of each place in that particular item. Maybe I want do they have name? They have name, yes. Kind of doesn't help if we don't have a name, right? We might want to know the name of the business. We might want to know the name. So if I want to get the name, it would look like this. And to be honest, let's give ourselves a little bit of a line break so that way we can kind of not overwhelm ourselves with 20 different things. Okay. Perfect. So pancakes on the rocks, that sounds pretty good. The boathouse on Black Wattle Bay. It's interesting. Rock Pool Bar and Grill. Some of these actually sound okay. It's from Sydney. It's Sydney, Australia. If anybody's watching from Sydney, you're going to have to let us know if these places are good. Okay, so that's getting just a simple value that's associated with key. We saw how to get a nested value, so one that's kind of, deep inside a dictionary. Let's handle something like photos, for example. So the photos is returned as a list. Now, sometimes you might get one photo back, sometimes you might get 5 photos back. I think by default they give you 1. They keep changing it, so it's like whatever it was last year. Geez, sometimes it's not even the same. But here, if we want to access the list of photos, so what we can do is handle the list of photos. So we're going to say for each photo, keep in mind this is a dictionary object because we declared it up here, right? For each photo in result, and then when it's photos, go to next, and we're going to say grab the height. And we'll say grab the height, debug, print, photo, and then we will get the height. And notice it is kind of giving us a nice little hint, letting us know that, hey, it is a dictionary that you're working with. And then I also want the width. Okay. Oh, then close it off. And I'll make sure to clear this out again. We'll run it just to make sure everything's okay. And we'll see what we get. Perfect. So it seemed like everything worked fine. This is getting, in that situation, each element from that particular list. So it's great that we can parse it, but more than likely, you probably want this in an Excel worksheet, right? So let's see if we can dump our data into an Excel workbook, kind of like what we were seeing right there. So how does that look? Well, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to define the worksheet that houses the data. Define the worksheet that will house the data. And so we'll say dim worksheet as worksheet. We're going to set our worksheet equal to this workbook, so the workbook that contains our code. We're going to go to the worksheets collection, and we're going to call the JSON sheet. Once we've done that, I think, do I have 2 methods with this one? Yeah, it's just one method. No, it's one method. One method. So in this one, we're going to loop through the result. So loop through the parsed data. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say count equals 1. We're going to say for each result in JSON results, what are we going to do? Well, the first thing that we'll do is we'll grab the ID, and what we'll do is we'll put that in column 1, right? So we'll grab the ID, and we'll say worksheet dot cells count. It's going to be the first column. Value equals result ID. Let's kind of walk through this a little bit. Well, this is going to be changing. So I'm going to be incrementing my count because for each result, I'm going to go to the next row. So my first result, I want it to be in row 1. Now, technically, if I had headers, I could start that at row 2. It's up to you, obviously. I'm going to start at row 1. I'm going to assume I don't want headers. And so I'm saying, okay, row 1, column 1, put the ID. And we're basically just going to kind of repeat this a couple different times. I might want the name, and that will be in column 2, and that will be name. I might want the latitude, right? So I might want the latitude. Yeah, and then of course I forgot to put that. So this is again demonstrating a nested dictionary. These ones are kind of just getting the outer ones. And then, hey, we might want to do the photos as well. That changes a little bit, but nothing, I would say, fancy, right? Nothing super crazy. So we're going to say for each photo in result photos next. And we're going to say, we're going to grab the height, and we're going to say worksheet dot cells. It's going to be count for dot value equals photo and then height. And then this one should be 3. Apologies. And then this one will be the width, right? Now, technically, this could get a little bit more complicated because if you had multiple photos, you technically would have to increment your column counter as well. So we kind of got lucky in the sense of we only had one element in that list. If you had multiple elements, it probably makes sense to just put that on its own sheet and then have something like an ID associated with it. The reason why is if you don't do that, then your data sets can get very large very quickly, because in some cases, like say you had, 20 photos or something like that, right? Well, then you could technically see data like duplicated 20 times, but the only thing that's different is the height and the width. So in a sense, this probably should be on its own sheet. In this case, it's fine just because it looks like we're only getting one back. But if you had multiple, then you would probably have to put that on its own sheet. And then obviously, before we go to the next result set, we do want to increment our counter. And so we'll say count, if I can get there. But other than that, that's really all it takes to kind of get all this information into our workbook. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear this out. What did I do? No, I had it all wrong. Darn it. Did I do it everything else? Okay, good. Sometimes it falls through. But we can see that it did a very nice job, and it put the ID, the name, latitude, and then the height, and then the width. So, with that being said, we finished the video. So if you have any questions about parsing JSON using VBA, please put them down in the comments below. I tried to show different examples, nested, a list, or such and such. But for the most part, I didn't think it was too complicated. If anything, I thought technically the what is it? This one with the XML was a little bit more complicated, but I do like the flexibility that we can kind of handle collections and then single elements and things along that nature. That does definitely have a benefit, but unfortunately, there's just really nothing built into VBA that will give us that. So we kind of have to rely on external, um, code in order to get what we need working. But I think this does a good job. I think he did an awesome job when it came to building this library. It's reliable. It does exactly what you need it to do, and I think more importantly, it does it in a pretty logical way. So I think leveraging built-in dictionaries makes that 10 times easier. And so I like the library that he built because he did make it really easy to kind of get the results that are needed. So again, if you have any questions, please put them down in the comments below and I will try to get back to you. Also, if you could, please make sure to like the video. We always appreciate the support. And if you're not already, please make sure to subscribe to the channel so that way you get regular updates as we release new videos. Next video, we're going to be seeing how to do one more topic in web scraping. We're going to be seeing how to parse HTML tables. That was a requested topic. So that's the next one. So thanks again for watching, everybody. We will see you in that video.